What if I told you that one man, armed not with brute strength but with pure genius, changed the art of war forever? And what if that same man, centuries before Napoleon or Alexander, could predict his enemy's moves as if he'd already fought the battle 100 times before? This is not just the story of Julius Caesar, the conqueror of Gaul and the man who brought the Roman Republic to its knees. It's the story of how he did it. The mind behind the tactics that shaped empires, the strategist who turned chaos into victory, and defeat into legend. In this cinematic journey, we'll uncover how Caesar, through deception, speed, and psychological warfare, became the most brilliant commander in history. From the frozen rivers of Gaul to the blood-red sands of Pharsalus, you'll step inside the mind of a man whose battlefield decisions still echo through military academies today. So, grab your seat, turn up the volume, and prepare to enter the mind of the greatest general who ever lived. Because once you understand how Caesar thought, you'll never see history or strategy the same way again. Subscribe now, and let's step into the war rooms of Julius Caesar himself. The rise of a tactical genius. Have you ever wondered how a single man without a crown, without divine blood, could bend the fate of empires? How a frail, debt-ridden politician in his 30s rose to command the most disciplined army the world had ever seen and turned it into an unstoppable war machine? Long before Julius Caesar stood on the banks of the Rubicon, long before his name became a synonym for absolute power, he was just another Roman noble trying to survive in a republic that devoured its own sons. Rome was bleeding. Civil wars had shattered its spirit, ambition had replaced honor, and corruption sat proudly in the Senate. The city that once united the Mediterranean was now choking on its own greed. Into this storm stepped Caesar, not with a sword, but with a smile. He was charming, eloquent, and dangerously ambitious. But beneath the polished speeches and gracious manners burned a mind obsessed with control over men, over fate, over history itself. Every alliance he made, every debt he took, every word he spoke was part of a grand design. He saw what others didn't. Power wasn't inherited. It was taken, piece by piece, move by move. Like a game of living chess. His first lesson in command came not on the battlefield but in the shadows of politics. As a young orator, he watched how the Senate worked, the whispers, the betrayals, the manipulation. He learned that victory didn't always come from the sword. It came from knowing when to strike, whom to flatter, and whom to crush. But even Caesar's political genius couldn't satisfy the hunger burning inside him. He craved something more eternal. Glory. The chance came in Gaul, to the senators in Rome. Gaul was a wild frontier forest, mud, barbarian tribes, and endless war. To Caesar, it was a blank canvas, waiting for him to carve his name across it. When he was given command of 4 legions in 58 BC, few in Rome paid attention. But Caesar knew what this meant. It wasn't just a governorship, it was freedom from the Senate's grip, and command over tens of thousands of men who would soon follow him not as a politician, but as a god. The first tribes he faced were fierce but divided. The Helvetii marched like a storm through Gaul, a vast migrating nation seeking new lands. Caesar intercepted them near the River Son, outnumbered, outmatched, but never out-hot. He struck when they least expected it while they were crossing the river. Half of their army was still on one side, the other half midstream, vulnerable. Caesar attacked with surgical precision, cutting them apart before they could even form ranks. It was not just a victory, it was a message. To Rome, that Caesar was no mere governor. To his soldiers, that their commander saw things others didn't. To his enemies, that he could appear from nowhere, strike like lightning, and vanish before they understood what had happened. But Caesar's real brilliance wasn't in winning battles, it was in making men believe. His soldiers adored him. He ate with them, marched beside them, called them comrades instead of subordinates. In a world of distant generals, Caesar became one of them. When the weather froze and supplies ran low, he suffered as they did. When victory came, he gave them the glory. Slowly, his legions stopped fighting for Rome and started fighting for him. That loyalty would soon be tested. Word came that the Germanic tribes were crossing into Gaul, fierce warriors led by Ariovistus, a king whose arrogance matched Caesar's own. The Senate in Rome feared disaster, but Caesar saw opportunity. If he could defeat Ariovistus, he would become the savior of Rome. If he failed, he would die forgotten on foreign soil. He met Ariovistus not with swords, but with diplomacy. Their meeting, held between the two armies, was tense, each man studying the other like predators circling. Caesar offered peace, but Ariovistus mocked him, saying Rome had no right to rule Gaul. Caesar's eyes narrowed. That insult would not be forgotten. When battle came, the Germans fought like beasts, screaming, fearless, charging in dense formations that crushed anything in their path. But Caesar had studied them. He had noted their rhythms, their confidence. And then, at the perfect moment, he broke them. He ordered a sudden advance from his hidden reserve, slamming into their flank as they pressed forward. The Germans panicked, their line buckling under the unexpected strike. Within hours, what had been a proud army turned into a massacre. The Rhine ran red, and the tribes were shattered. Caesar had done the impossible. He had defeated the most feared warriors of the north. The Senate praised him but secretly trembled. For the first time, they saw that his ambition had no limits, but for Caesar this was only the beginning. Each victory in Gaul brought him wealth, power, and most importantly, loyalty. His soldiers followed him through rivers of mud, freezing winters, and endless marshes. They believed he could not be defeated. And yet, even as he conquered the north, a shadow grew behind him, the Gaulish leader who would challenge everything Caesar had built. A young chieftain, fierce and charismatic, who would unite the tribes under one banner. His name was Vercingetorix. When Caesar first heard of him, he laughed. Another tribal rebellion, he thought. Another name destined for the grave. But Vercingetorix was no ordinary rebel. He had learned from Caesar his speed, his cunning, his use of surprise. He fought like the Roman general himself. Their clash would not just decide the fate of Gaul. It would forge Caesar's legacy in blood and fire. As the year 52 BC dawned, the winter snows of Gaul hid armies on the move. Fires flickered in the forests, signaling revolt. Caesar, far from his legions, faced his greatest challenge yet. The hunter had become the hunted. And for the first time in years, Julius Caesar was about to realize that even the greatest mind in history could be cornered. The trap in the north. Have you ever felt the ground shift beneath you? Not from an earthquake, but from destiny itself turning against you? For Julius Caesar, that moment came when he realized that Gaul, which he thought he had tamed, was rising once more in flames. The year was 52 BC, the snows were melting, and so was Caesar's sense of control. Whispers reached his camp village after village had rebelled. Roman garrisons burned alive in their forts, supply lines severed. And at the heart of it all was one name: Vercingetorix. He was young, brilliant, and ruthless. The son of a Gallic noble executed by his own people, he united tribes that had spent generations killing each other. What Caesar had done for Rome, Vercingetorix was now doing for Gaul, but with a twist. He was using Caesar's own methods against him. He knew Caesar's speed, his reliance on surprise, and his talent for psychological warfare. And he used that knowledge to set the greatest trap of the Gallic Wars. Caesar, trapped between duty and desperation, gathered what forces he could. His legions were scattered across Gaul, wintering in distant provinces. Snow choked the passes, rivers were swollen with ice, and enemy riders cut through his couriers like wolves. But Caesar did not panic. He adapted. He became what his enemies feared most: unpredictable. He ordered his men to march through blizzards, covering nearly 20 miles a day in frozen armor and rations reduced to crumbs. No one thought he would move so early in the season. No one ever had. But Caesar turned nature itself into a weapon. By doing what was impossible, he made his enemies unprepared. He reached the rebel stronghold of Avaricum, a fortified city, rich with grain and hope for the Gauls. Vercingetorix had advised its destruction, saying, "If we burn it, Caesar will starve." But the people, proud and defiant, refused. It was their home, their pride. And that pride would cost them dearly. Caesar laid siege to the city. Rain fell for days, turning the Roman camps into seas of mud. The Gauls mocked them from the walls, shouting insults and waving captured Roman gear. But Caesar's patience was iron. He built siege towers, battering rams, and massive ramps mile by mile, under constant fire. His soldiers worked through the night, their torches flickering like stars in the storm. And then, one night, Caesar struck. As thunder rolled across the sky, the Roman war horns blared. Siege towers rumbled forward, and soldiers poured through breaches in the wall. The Gauls fought like demons, but they were no match for Caesar's precision. Within hours of Vercingetorix fell, the city burned, its defenders slaughtered. Caesar allowed no mercy. 40,000 men, women, and children perished. It was vengeance, but also warning. To all Gaul, this was the price of defiance, yet even as the flames died, Caesar knew the war was far from over. He had won the city but lost the land. The tribes grew more united than ever under Vercingetorix, whose legend only grew stronger, and Vercingetorix, watching from afar, smiled. He hadn't wanted to win that battle. He wanted Caesar to win too well, because the real war wasn't about cities, it was about hunger. Caesar's legions were far from supply, deep in enemy territory. Fields were burned, villages empty, rivers poisoned. Everywhere they marched, the land was dead. The Gauls had adopted a scorched earth strategy, one Caesar had once used himself. Now his own playbook was being turned against him. Food dwindled. Horses collapsed. Soldiers whispered of curses and omens. The general who had seemed invincible now faced the one enemy he couldn't outthink, time, and that's when Vercingetorix struck again. He drew Caesar into the highlands of central Gaul, into the trap of Gergovia, a fortress city perched atop a steep hill surrounded by cliffs and forests. To assault it was madness. To retreat would be humiliation. Caesar, for once, hesitated, but his pride demanded action. He devised a clever deception, a feint attack to draw the Gauls from one side of the hill while secretly scaling the other. For a moment it worked. His troops breached part of the defenses. Victory seemed within reach, then chaos, a signal was misread. Legions advanced too far. Communication broke, dust filled the air, and the Gauls counterattacked with fury. Trapped between the steep slopes and the enemy's charge, Caesar's men fell by the hundreds. The unthinkable happened. Julius Caesar lost. Gergovia became a name whispered like a wound among Roman ranks. Caesar, for all his brilliance, had been outplayed by a man who had learned from him, but defeat has a way of sharpening genius. Caesar did not crumble. Instead, he vanished, disappearing into the countryside, rallying broken legions, gathering allies. He spoke not of revenge, but of destiny. "This war will not end," he told his officers, "until Rome itself calls me home." And fate, it seemed, was listening. As summer bled into autumn, Vercingetorix made a fateful decision. He retreated to a fortified hill called Alesia, believing he could withstand Caesar's siege until reinforcements arrived. It was a stronghold perched on a plateau, ringed by rivers and cliffs. To any general, it was untouchable. To Julius Caesar, it was the perfect trap. He would not attack it. He would surround it. Day after day, Roman soldiers dug trenches, built walls, towers, and palisades encircling the entire city. And when word came that massive Gallic reinforcements were marching to save their leader, Caesar smiled coldly, because he had already built a second wall, this time facing outward, one army trapped inside. Another approaching from outside, and Caesar caught between them both, two enemies. One man. No escape, but for Caesar, it was never about escape. It was about strategy, about the mind's war against chaos. And in that narrow valley of Alesia, the world would soon witness how a single man could outthink an entire civilization. As night fell over the Roman camps, Caesar stood on the ramparts, the torches flickering around him, his face carved in shadow. He looked toward Alesia, where Vercingetorix waited. Tomorrow, the storm would break, and only one name would rise from the ashes of Gaul. The siege of Alesia. What happens when two geniuses meet not across a table, but across the battlefield? When intellect itself becomes the weapon? Alesia would be that crucible. The place where Julius Caesar and Vercingetorix would wager everything: ambition, glory, and survival on the sharp edge of strategy. The dawn that rose over Alesia was eerily silent. Mist coiled around the hills, hiding the Roman trenches that ringed the fortress like a tightening noose. Inside the city, Vercingetorix watched from the walls as the fog lifted to reveal a nightmare, miles of wooden fortifications. Spikes, traps, ditches layer after layer of Roman engineering. Each wall more impossible than the last. Caesar had built not one, but two sieges, one to keep the Gauls inside, another to keep their reinforcements out. It was a fortress against a fortress, a circle of death both inward and outward. Even his enemies, centuries later, would admit it was a masterpiece of military genius. Inside Alesia, the situation grew desperate. Food ran out, disease spread, and cries echoed through the night. Vercingetorix held his people together with the fire of his conviction. "Hold," he told them. "Help is coming." And he was right beyond the hills. An enormous Gallic relief army, perhaps 200,000 strong, was marching to break the siege. Caesar knew they were coming. Scouts had seen the smoke of their campfires on the horizon. He was trapped between two enemies, the starving fortress behind him and the roaring horde before him. Every Roman soldier understood what that meant. There would be no retreat, no surrender, no rescue. In the center of his camp, Caesar gathered his officers. The air was tense. Maps lay scattered on the table, torches flickered, casting red light on faces drawn with fatigue. "We do not fight for Rome," he told them. "We fight for history." He divided his forces with surgical precision, half facing inward to hold the besieged city, half outward to repel the coming army. Every man knew his post. Every tower, every ditch, every trap was positioned for one purpose: to buy Caesar time. When the Gallic relief army arrived, the earth shook with their roar. They poured into the valleys like a flood, their banners stretching across the horizon. Drums thundered, horns blared, and the Gauls inside Alesia answered with cheers of hope. Vercingetorix mounted his horse, his armor gleaming in the fading light, and ordered a charge from within. The trap had sprung. Caesar's army was now attacked from both sides. The battle that followed was chaos. Arrows darkened the sky. Catapults hurled stones the size of chariots, and men screamed as trenches filled with bodies. The Gauls struck from outside with relentless fury, while those trapped inside hurled down projectiles, rushing the walls in desperate coordination. The Romans, surrounded and outnumbered, fought with the discipline of machines. For hours, the outcome hung by a thread. At one point, the outer lines nearly broke. The relief force found a weak point near a hill and poured through, driving Roman soldiers back in panic. Caesar rode to the breach himself, his crimson cloak a beacon amid the storm. His officers begged him to stay back, but he refused. "The battle is decided here," he shouted. Drawing his sword, what happened next would become legend. He led the countercharge personally. The sight of Caesar calm, fearless, commanding amid the slaughter reignited his men. They fought like men possessed, pushing the Gauls back step by step until the ground ran slick with blood. Caesar's horse was slain beneath him. He rose, mud-splattered and unyielding, and pressed on. By dusk, the outer army faltered. The Gallic reinforcements, seeing their assault fail, broke ranks. Their courage crumbled as fast as it had ignited. Those inside Alesia watched in horror as their saviors turned and fled. Vercingetorix's heart sank. He knew it was over. When the sun set, silence fell across the field. The fires of Alesia glowed faintly against the black sky. The next morning, Vercingetorix emerged from the gates on horseback, his sword reversed in his hand, a symbol of surrender. He rode slowly toward Caesar's camp through the rows of Roman soldiers who watched in awe. He dismounted before Caesar, threw his armor at his feet, and bowed his head. Caesar said nothing. The conqueror of Gaul simply looked down, expression unreadable. As history shifted once more, Vercingetorix was taken prisoner, destined to march in Caesar's triumph through Rome before being executed. But in that moment, even Caesar seemed to understand he hadn't just defeated a man. He had conquered an idea. The unity of Gaul had died at Alesia, and with it, the last resistance to Roman supremacy in the West. News of the victory spread like wildfire. In Rome, his enemies trembled. The Senate had once mocked him as reckless. Now they whispered that he was unstoppable. They celebrated him publicly, but privately, they feared him more than any foreign king, and they were right to fear, because Caesar's victories in Gaul had made him more than a general. He was now the most powerful man alive, an idol to his soldiers, a god to the people, and a threat to the Republic itself. But in the quiet of his tent, amid the trophies and maps, Caesar wasn't celebrating. He stared at the candlelight, eyes distant. He knew that this triumph would not bring peace, it would bring war, for across the sea, another man watched him with equal ambition, Pompey the Great, once Caesar's ally, now his rival. The Republic could not contain two such giants. And as the wains of destiny shifted once again, Caesar would face his most dangerous enemy, yet not the barbarians of Gaul, but Rome itself. The real war was coming, and the next time Caesar crossed a river, it wouldn't be in Gaul, it would be the Rubicon, where he would defy the Senate, defy tradition, and defy fate itself. The fate of the Republic was about to hang on the edge of one man's choice. The Rubicon gamble. What would you do if every step forward meant treason, but every step back meant oblivion? Julius Caesar stood at that threshold, his boots wet from the icy current of the Rubicon River, staring at the border that separated loyalty from rebellion. Life from legend. It was the winter of 49 BC. The chill cut through the night air as torches flickered along the riverbank. Behind Caesar, thousands of soldiers waited in tense silence, their armor glinting under the pale moon. They had followed him through a decade of blood and glory in Gaul. Now they waited to see if he would take one final, fatal step against Rome itself. The Senate had spoken. They had stripped him of command, ordered him to disband his legions, and return home a private citizen. They claimed it was justice. Caesar knew it was fear. Pompey the Great, once his ally and son-in-law, now stood at the head of Rome's armies. The Republic had chosen sides, and Caesar's name had become a curse in the Senate halls. He had two choices: obey and be destroyed politically, perhaps even executed, or cross this shallow stream and plunge the Republic into civil war. For hours he said nothing. He paced the bank, his cloak whipping in the cold wind. His officers watched in silence, their breath visible in the dark. Then at last he stopped. He looked at the water as if it were alive, whispering destiny's warning. Finally, he spoke the words that would echo through 2,000 years of history. The die is cast. And he crossed. It was not the march of an army, it was the march of fate. Trumpets cut the air as the legions stepped into the shallows, the water rippling around their feet. They were not just soldiers now. They were revolutionaries, bound to their commander by loyalty stronger than law. The Rubicon behind them might as well have been the point of no return. In Rome, panic erupted. Senators fled in haste, their togas trailing behind them as they escaped into the night. Pompey, taken by surprise, withdrew his forces south to regroup. The city that had ruled an empire now trembled before the will of one man. Caesar entered Rome not as a conqueror, but as a storm swift, precise, unstoppable. He seized the treasury, claiming the gold and silver for the people. The commoners cheered him as their savior. The Senate cursed him as a tyrant. But Caesar's mind was already elsewhere. He knew this was only the beginning. Pompey had not been defeated, only delayed. His armies still held the east, and his fleet controlled the seas. To face him would mean the most brutal campaign of Caesar's life. But Caesar understood that hesitation was death. He would strike fast, as always. His first victory came in Spain, where he crushed Pompey's legions before their master could even join them. "I go to fight an army without a general," he said coldly, "and soon a general without an army." His speed was breathtaking, his maneuvers almost impossible. In mere months, the West was his, but the decisive battle loomed across the Adriatic in Greece. There Pompey waited with an army twice Caesar's size, bolstered by senators, nobles, and veterans of countless wars. When Caesar landed on the Greek coast, storms wrecked part of his fleet, leaving him cut off and outnumbered. For the first time, even his men began to doubt, yet Caesar smiled. "We are not trapped with them," he said. "They are trapped with us." What followed was a deadly dance of strategy and deception. Caesar feigned retreats, struck supply lines, and forced Pompey's hand again and again. His soldiers, hardened by Gaul, trusted every command. Every silence. Then came Pharsalus. The battlefield stretched across the plains like an open stage for destiny. Caesar's army was smaller, tired, and hungry, but his confidence was unshaken. Pompey, meanwhile, stood proud, his legions shining in perfect formation. Believing victory already theirs, Caesar rode before his men, his voice steady but fierce. "These are not the legions of the Republic," he said, pointing toward Pompey's ranks. "They are the legions of fear. Remember who you are. You are my soldiers. You have conquered Gaul, you have conquered death. Conquer once more." As the horn sounded, the two greatest armies of the ancient world clashed like thunder. Dust rose in choking clouds. The ground trembled under the weight of marching iron. Pompey's cavalry struck first, sweeping wide in a grand charge meant to crush Caesar's flank. But Caesar had foreseen it. Hidden behind his front lines, he had placed a small reserve of cohorts veterans instructed to hold their spears low and aim not for the horses, but for the faces of the riders. It worked perfectly. Pompey's proud cavalry recoiled in chaos, their formation breaking apart as riders fell screaming. Caesar seized the moment. He ordered his entire line to advance, pressing the attack with relentless force. The timing was flawless, the execution absolute. Within hours, Pompey's army collapsed. The senators who had followed him fled in terror. Pompey himself escaped the field, leaving behind thousands of corpses and his dream of restoring the Republic. The Battle of Pharsalus was not just a victory, it was a revelation. Caesar had proven that genius could defeat numbers, that precision could shatter pride. But as his men celebrated, Caesar stood silent. His face unreadable. He had defeated his greatest rival, but in doing so, he had destroyed the last balance of power in Rome. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge with the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, but when Caesar pursued him, he found not an ally nor an enemy but a corpse. The Egyptians had killed Pompey and presented his head to Caesar as a gift. Caesar turned away, disgusted. "This was a Romang," he murmured, "and you have murdered him." He wept for his enemy, for Rome, perhaps for himself, but destiny offered no time for mourning. Because in the golden halls of Alexandria, Caesar would soon meet someone who would change his life and the course of history forever. She waited for him, wrapped in linen and mystery. A queen whose beauty and brilliance were said to rival the gods. Her name was Cleopatra. The queen and the conqueror. Have you ever seen two storms collide, where the air itself crackles with danger, power, and temptation? That was the moment when Julius Caesar met Cleopatra. He had come to Egypt chasing a ghost, the shadow of Pompey, only to find himself drawn into something even more perilous, a war of seduction. Politics and destiny. Alexandria shimmered under the desert sun, its marble palaces gleaming beside the blue Nile. The city was a jewel of ancient civilization, where scholars debated in the great library and merchants from every land filled the streets with the scent of spices and salt. Yet beneath the splendor, chaos reigned. Ptolemy XIII, a boy king barely a teenager, had seized the throne from his sister Cleopatra. The court was split, the city on edge. Caesar arrived at the heart of a storm. When the Egyptians brought him Pompey's severed head, expecting gratitude, Caesar felt only disgust. Pompey had been his rival, yes, but also once his ally, his son-in-law, his mirror. His murder was not justice, it was cowardice. He vowed to restore order not only in Egypt, but in himself. And that was when she appeared. Cleopatra did not enter the story like a queen, but like a secret. Legend says she had herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters, rolled inside a carpet. When the fabric unfurled, the young queen stood before the Roman general, her dark eyes gleaming with both defiance and charm. Caesar froze, not because of her beauty alone, but because of the aura that surrounded her. Here was someone who understood power as deeply as he did. Their alliance was instant and electric. Both had been betrayed, both had enemies closing in, and both knew that their survival depended on boldness. Cleopatra saw in Caesar not just a conqueror, but a key to her throne. Caesar saw in her not just a queen, but a kindred spirit, a mind equal to his own in cunning and ambition. As the city plunged into civil war, Caesar made his choice. He sided with Cleopatra, declaring her rightful queen of Egypt. It was not merely politics. It was destiny intertwining with desire. Together they held the royal palace against Ptolemy's forces. The young king's armies besieged them, surrounding the palace walls with fire and arrows. For months, Alexandria became Caesar's new battlefield. His Roman soldiers fought street by street, defending the harbor, cutting off the enemy's supply routes. The great library itself burned, its scrolls turning to ash, one of history's greatest losses in the crossfire of ambition. Yet through the smoke, Caesar endured, directing every maneuver with icy focus. One night, when the flames came dangerously close, he personally led a desperate escape to secure the harbor. With only a handful of men, he leapt into the sea under a hail of arrows, swimming through the black water to reach his ships. He emerged dripping, exhausted, but alive, his determination burning brighter than the city behind him. And in the morning, the tide turned. Reinforcements from Syria arrived, and Caesar struck with precision. Ptolemy's army was routed. The boy king himself drowned in the Nile while trying to flee. Cleopatra was restored to her throne. Egypt bowed once more, but not to a native pharaoh, rather to the Roman general who had remade its destiny. For Caesar, it should have been another victory in a lifetime of them. But something had shifted. Cleopatra was no ordinary ruler. She fascinated him not as a lover of beauty, but as a student of intellect. Their conversations stretched into the night about politics, philosophy, the stars. She spoke as if she were born to rule the world, and Caesar, for the first time, felt what it meant to share ambition. In time, she bore him a son, Ptolemy Caesarion. To the Romans it was scandal. To the Egyptians it was divine. To Caesar it was legacy. For years he had fought to carve his name into history's stone. Now, for the first time, it had blood. Yet even amid the silk and splendor of Alexandria, Caesar's mind never rested. He received reports from Rome: unrest, conspiracy, resentment. Senators who had once trembled before him were whispering again. He had left a power vacuum, and the Republic was cracking under the weight of uncertainty. Cleopatra urged him to stay, to rule from the Nile, not the Tiber, but Caesar knew he could not. He belonged to Rome. The empire, he said softly to her one night, has many hearts but only one pulse. When he departed Egypt, he left behind not only a queen but a fragment of his soul. He sailed north, victorious yet restless. His triumphs had reshaped the world, but now he would have to reshape Rome itself. When he entered the city again, the people erupted in thunderous cheers. They called him dictator for life. Parades filled the streets, golden statues rose in his image, and coins bore his face as if he were already a god. But in the Senate, the whispers grew darker. He wears the crown of kings, they muttered, while pretending to serve the Republic. Caesar waved away their fears. I have no need of crowns, he said. But the truth was more complex. He no longer saw Rome as it had been, a web of senators and tradition, but as it could be, an empire led by a single mind. His mind, he enacted reforms, laws that fed the poor, rewarded soldiers, expanded citizenship. To the people he was a savior. To the senators, a tyrant. Each decree widened the chasm between his ideals and their fear, and through it all, his enemies smiled in silence, waiting, because the same brilliance that had built Caesar's empire was now building his downfall. A whisper became a rumor. A rumor became a plot, and the knives of Rome were being sharpened in the dark. The Ides of March. Have you ever watched the moment before a storm, when the sky holds its breath and the birds go silent, as if the world itself knows what's about to come? That was Rome on the morning of March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March, the day when the greatest mind in history would walk straight into eternity and never walk out again. Caesar awoke in his villa on the Palatine Hill, the city still wrapped in mist. His wife, Calpurnia, had spent the night restless. She had dreamed of blood, of the Senate steps flowing red, of Caesar's statue cracked and toppled. When he rose to dress, she clutched his arm and begged him not to go to the Senate that day. Something evil waits for you there, she whispered. Caesar, who had faced 1,000 battlefields and never flinched, smiled gently. Cowards die many times before their deaths, he said. The valiant never taste death but once. He kissed her hand and stepped out into the morning light. Outside, Rome was alive with whispers. The streets buzzed with the usual noise of vendors and citizens, but under it ran an uneasy and invisible hum of tension that even the sunlight couldn't dissolve. His lictors led the way through the forum, clearing the crowds as he made his slow, deliberate walk toward the theater of Pompey, the temporary meeting place of the Senate. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony. The Senate would meet beneath the very statue of Pompey, the man whose shadow had haunted Caesar's life, the man he had once defeated at Pharsalus. As he approached the steps, one of his allies, Spurina, the soothsayer, met him in passing. "Beware the Ides of March," the man murmured. Caesar laughed softly. "The Ides of March have come," he said. "Aye," the seer replied, "but they have not yet gone." Inside, the Senate chamber was cool and echoing, filled with marble light. Around 80 senators stood waiting, the air thick with tension disguised as civility. Among them were faces Caesar trusted: Brutus, Cassius, Casca, men who had dined at his table, fought beside him, sworn loyalty to him. They greeted him warmly, bowing as he entered, their smiles carefully stitched over fear and guilt. Caesar, dressed in his crimson-bordered toga, moved among them with calm dignity. He took his seat on the golden chair prepared for him, the symbol of his near-divine authority. The murmurs hushed. Then, suddenly, one senator stepped forward, holding out a petition. "I beg you, Caesar, to grant this favor," he said. Caesar waved him closer, reading the parchment. Another senator stepped nearer, pretending to assist. Then another, and another. The circle tightened. In an instant, the chamber turned from ceremony to conspiracy. The first blow came from behind. Casca struck, his dagger grazing Caesar's neck. The general twisted in shock, eyes wide not from pain but disbelief. "Casca, you villain, what is this?" he gasped. Then came a second blow. And a third. The senators fell upon him like a storm. Knives flashed in the torchlight, white to red, red to black. The chamber filled with the wet sound of steel meeting flesh, the hiss of breath, the grunt of effort. Caesar fought back for a moment, struggling to rise, but there were too many men he had trusted, men he had lifted to power. And then, through the chaos, one face emerged. Marcus Junius Brutus, Caesar's friend, his protégé, his almost son. When Caesar saw him, the fury drained from his eyes, replaced by something deeper: resignation, heartbreak, the slow recognition of fate fulfilled. The dagger hovered, trembling in Brutus's hand. "Et tu, Brute," Caesar whispered. "And you too, Brutus?" The words were not of anger, but of sorrow. And with that, the greatest general in history fell beneath the statue of his fallen rival, Pompey. The blade that ended him pierced not just a man, but an age. Outside, the city thundered with confusion. The senators emerged pale and trembling, shouting, "Liberty! Freedom!" But there was no applause, only the sound of chaos blooming through the streets. The people, who had loved Caesar more than they had ever loved the Republic, screamed his name in grief and rage. That night, Rome burned with uncertainty. Brutus and Cassius thought they had saved the Republic. Instead, they had doomed it. For Caesar's death did not restore freedom, it shattered it. The senators had killed the body of one man, but birthed the soul of an empire. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant, took the blood-stained cloak and lifted it before the crowd days later. His voice trembled with passion as he spoke at Caesar's funeral. "You all did love him once," he cried, "not without cause. What cause withholds you, then, to mourn for him?" He revealed the wounds 23 and all, and one by one named the men who had delivered them. The crowd wept. Then they raged. Rome descended into an inferno. Houses of the conspirators were torched. Riots tore through the streets. And from the ashes rose something new, not the republic of old, but the seed of empire. Because Caesar's death did not end his story, it only ensured it would never die. His name became legend, his life a blueprint for ambition. The young man who had once walked into Gaul with 4 legions now walked into eternity as a god. And years later, when his adopted heir Octavian, soon to be Augustus, took power, he did not call himself king or dictator, he called himself Caesar. The title would live for 2,000 years. In every Kaiser, in every Tsar, in every ruler who believed themselves chosen by destiny to command the world. Julius Caesar's genius did not end with his life, it became history's heartbeat. And even now, when we speak of greatness, when we whisper the names of those who dared to defy limits, his shadow stands among them. The man who crossed the Rubicon, conquered nations, and shaped the world with his mind. The man whose fall changed civilization forever. The man called Caesar. The end.